Secretary of the branch, CA Prashant Kumar. Learned speakers for today's virtual CP program, CA B. Sambamurthy Garu and Dr. Abhishek Thakur ji, senior members of the profession, respected past chairman, my colleagues in the managing committee, my dear professional colleagues. A very good evening to you all and welcome you all to this virtual CP program on the topic Central Bank Digital Currencies and Blockchain Technology. We, the members of Visakhapatnam branch, express our sincere thanks to the speakers, CA Sambamurthy Garu, for accepting our request to address the members of Visakhapatnam branch on today's topic, digital currencies of central bank. In fact, he is a brother of our past chairman, CA B.V. Rao Garu, and senior member, CA Panduranga Garu. Our special thanks to you, sir, for suggesting another good speaker, Dr. Abhishek Thakur ji, to deliberate on blockchain technology subject. So thank you, Dr. Abhishek Thakur ji, for your kind acceptance to address our members. Members, it is saddened to note about the sad demise of one of our members, CA Rukmini Devi Garu, at the age of 54 years on 25th of this month on Monday. Due to sudden ill health, she is daughter of late CA Grandi Krishnamurthy Garu and wife of CA Nagesh Motamari. Members, let us maintain silence for a minute for the departed soul to attain Sadgati. Members, coming to the topic, central bank digital currencies. CBDC has emerged a hot topic in the financial world during recent times. Several central banks are running analysis and studies investing the technical and economic feasibility of the introduction of digital money and the impact it might have on monetary policy, liquidity, etc. And what is CBDC? Central bank digital currency is a digital form of currency that is backed by a central bank and though that has legal tender status. This definition means it is recognized by law as a means to settle debts or meet financial obligations such as tax payments. CBDC is indeed reasonably similar to the bills in your wallet, but storing and transacting with physical currency is very inefficient and tedious. A digital representation of that value would be much more convenient and efficient. Why should people prefer CBDC over bank accounts? The main reason people would prefer CBDC over bank account is that CBDC is not a risk when banks fail. The removal of that risk would be beneficial to individuals and the economy alike. Furthermore, the transfer of money across banks and country boundaries becomes much more straightforward, whereas bank systems would not need to interact with each other to facilitate such payments. All that is required is an update of the record at central bank. This simplicity makes the process faster and cheaper. There are furthermore benefits such as money laundering could be easier to identify. There is better chance for financial inclusion. And there is a potential for innovative payment systems and financial services and many others. We have eminent speaker CA Sambamurthy Garu with us today to explain about many other issues connected to CBDC, like how does the CBDC differ from the money in your bank account? What are the benefits of CBDC? What would be the future role of banks? How do loans currently work? what would be the effect of CBDC on the economy, etc. And coming to second topic is blockchain technology. So blockchain technology is simply defined as decentralized distributed ledger that records the provenance of digital asset. By inherent design, the data on a blockchain is unable to be modified, which makes it legitimate disruptor for industries like payments, cybersecurity, and healthcare. A simple analogy for understanding blockchain technology is a Google document. When we create a document and share it with a group of people, the document is distributed instead of copied or transferred. This creates a decentralized distribution chain that gives everyone access to the document. At the same time, no one is locked out awaiting changes from another party, while all modifications to the document are being recorded in real time, making changes completely transparent. Of course, blockchain is more complicated than Google Doc, but the analogy is apt. Our learned speaker, Dr. Abhishek Thakur, who is expert in the field, will enlighten us through what it is and how it is used and history and other related issues on this topic. Members, an announcement, we the Visakhapatnam branch is organizing RRC, Regional Residential Conference at Maredumilli on 27th and 28th of November, Saturday and Sunday. The details will be shared to you all shortly. Please block your dates. Since we do not have physical meetings and fellowship for a long time, let us utilize this opportunity to have learning with entertainment. So now I request C.S. Sridhar Andavarapu to introduce the speaker of today's first session, C.S. Ambamurthy Garu.
Good evening, sir. CA B. Sambamurthy is a chartered accountant with over 40 years of banking and related experience in various banks, IT, and electronic payment related organizations. Some of the important responsibilities in the past he had to include as chairman NPCI, National Payment Corporation of India, and also director as RBI nominee. As director and CEO of IDRBT, Institute of Development and Research in Banking Technology, established by RBI, which besides academic activities like postgraduate and PhD programs, operated gateway for NEFT or RTGS, National Financial ATM, switch before being hived off organizations like IAF, TAS, NPCI, helped in setting up centers of excellence in big data analytics, mobile banking, and cybersecurity. As chairman of Corporation Bank till 2008, as executive director of Indian Bank, also served on the boards or governing councils of some companies or organizations like Bandhan Bank, Data Security Council of India, an ASCOM body, Indian Institute of Banking and Finance, Clearing Corporation of India, IDBI Bank, Intech Limited, etc. Served on a few committees of RBI like mobile banking, financial inclusion, and IT vision for RBI, payment vision of RBI. Served as member of the Apex Committee of TIFAC, Technology Information and Forecasting Council, Government of India, and Committee on Cloud Computing, MIT and DIT, Government of India. People, product, process, and technology is his favorite platform. He has also led the team that innovated branchless banking during the year 2007 at Corporation Bank, biometric-based payment and banking services model that has now morphed into AEPS. He has also contributed more than 40 articles on banking and finance in financial dailies like Business Line, Economic Times, and Business Standards, etc. He is presently serving in NSDL as independent director and in Insurance Information Bureau of India, established by IRDAI as governing council member. With these few words, I introduce the speaker to the August gallery. I request the speaker to take over the session.
So I request Sridhar to introduce the second technical session speaker also, Dr. Abhishek Thakur. He is also now here. So introduce her so that session can be continued one of them.
Okay, sir. It's my pleasure to introduce Abhishek Thakurji. Abhishek Thakurji is an assistant professor as at the Institute for Development and Research in Banking Technology, where he works on 5G use cases lab for BFS, open source technologies, and fintech collaboration. His research interests include multimedia communications, financial inclusion, and rural ICT deployment. He presently contributes to projects in the realm of distributed ledger technologies and 5G use cases lab for banking and financial services. In his 24 years career split across industry and academia, and he has developed multiple global solutions for both product and service-based organizations. At 5G Use Cases Lab, he champions the technology horizontals for cross-domain network slicing, multi-access edge compute, and rural connectivity. Besides pursuing applied academic research in BFS, he is also advising the IT teams of multiple banks. He is passionate about making technology simple and sustainable for the masses. With these few words, I introduce Abhishek Thakurji to the August Gallery. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, C.S. Sridhar. And now I request C.S. Samamurthy to take up the session, sir.
So first of all, good evening to all of you. And thank you, Murali Krishna Garu and the management committee of Vizag chapter for having me this evening. It's a great pleasure to talk to fellow professionals, and more so from Vizag, from where basically I hail. Of course, I left the place about 45 years ago and had to come back. And then it's always a pleasure to talk to fellow CS who have not been in practice or not in much touch with the practicing CS. So I always believe in continuous learning. I don't think learning should end, whether CPE or no CPE. I think continuous learning that's where we need to make ourselves relevant. Why we have to make ourselves relevant? As somebody said, in all our homes, there is a chief technology officer, either our millennial child or grandchild. Probably they know more about technology than us, right? So we will not be even relevant to our own at home, to our own children or grandchildren. If we don't at least know the basics of technology, forget about the general society. So I think that journey has to continue, whatever be the age and all. Coming of age, I don't know how many of you know that the 2019 Nobel laureate, who is that? His name is good enough, I think. He got Nobel Prize at the age of 96. And then he was going to, I believe, the lab even at that age. And somebody asked him, why are you going to the lab? You're already age 95 and all. The reply he has given is simply, it doesn't mean if I retire, it doesn't mean I'm waiting to die. I think so long as I have the passion, I may not have the energy like an instant at all, I have the passion, I can go and work in the lab. So if someone can work up to 96, what is the age kind of a thing? And win a Nobel at that age. I mean, the passion is not lost. So even in India, I've come across a lot of people, some of the former governors, even at 85, they're so sharp as in their thought process, because they are continuously relevant to what is happening. So one challenge for all of us, whatever be our professional service, we need to stay relevant at home. Forget about the society at large. Today, the opportunities are immense and all that, right? So in fact, my own interface with technology started after I attained 60. After I retired from Corporation Bank, my journey with technology started at 60. So no age is those days idea we used to run the payment system as well as the academic kind of a thing. It's a huge challenge and an opportunity. So that's where whether we know whether we actually operate or do coding or no coding is not important. For us to understand technology is more important, because the whole thing would be driven by technology. So when our own clients, your own clients also automate, digitize. So it is imperative on the part of even CA professionals to understand. So as I said, I think Abhishek would deal, like we are all used to centralized ledger system, be it in the bank or be it for you, your own clients. So it is going to be decentralized. So what is that? How are you going to handle the audit? How are you going to do the accounting systems? So it's an opportunity as well as a challenge. I think Abhishek will deal with that. So far as digital currency is concerned, I'll talk about on 10 issues briefly, each of them. First one, I will talk about types of digital currencies. Second one, what are the functions of money basic, how digital currency comes into the picture. Third is, what is the global scenario? Because we are not the only country we are trying to do it. Fourth one, what are the design principles of CBDC? There are a lot of choices there. Fifth one is why India should go for CBDC. Is there a use case for us or simply joining the bandwagon? Number 6, what are the implications of a banking system? I think Murali Krishna briefly touched about what happens to the banking system. Number 7, what are the implications for monetary policy? And then 8th point is cross-border payments. They are very relevant today. A lot of work is getting done. And then BIS, Bank for International Settlement, which is called Central Bank of Central Banks. In fact, they are coming out with a lot of standards, guiding principles and all. What are they doing? And then ultimately, what we need to do if we have to probably allow cryptos and digital currencies in our country, because that is an issue. So let me talk of these digital currencies. There is tech part and there is a financial banking and economy part. Tech part, Dr. Abhishek would take care of it, so I will not touch on that. The other part, I mean, other implications of finance, economy, banking, and all that we will discuss and all. Right. Before I get into the types of digital currency, we need to understand what are the functions of money globally, because we have been using this form for almost 1,000 years all over the world. Of course, China has taken the lead for the first paper currency. Incidentally, China is the first one again to start digital currency, whether you like it or not. That is the kind of innovation that takes place. Many probably have a perception that China copies US and then that's how they've grown. In fact, US is now trying to cope up with the technology innovations that are taking place in China. This is the other way around. That's the reality, all of us. Of course, we have a problem with China, so we can't depend on China. We need to find out our own story, our own path. So what are the basic functions of money? There are 4 basic functions, if you want to call it a currency. First is that it is a unit of account. So if you say you want to buy something for 10 rupees, 10 rupees you buy a particular thing. Before that unit of account, what was the system? Barter. So if I want to buy 5 cows, I have got sheep, 10 sheep, right? Then I have to find out somebody who has got the cows. Or if I want to buy something else, say some rice, I want to buy bags of rice, I've got say 4 cows. So I have to find out somebody, and also there was no standard unit of account. It's all barter 2 things. Whereas a currency, if you call a currency, that currency has solved all these problems, barter problems. So when you are buying something, you don't have to find somebody else who has got this, who has got this. That matching problem is not there. Number 2, it is a store of value. Of course, store of value means that they should not fluctuate, violently fluctuate. Then it's not a store of value. Of course, there is a criticism even when the inflation is high, even these whatever currencies there that also depreciate, but that is very reasonable kind of. Third one is it should be a medium of exchange. People should accept it as a society. And fourth one is the currency shall be issued by the government, not by any private party. So these are the basic 4 functions of currency. So I'll come to now 3 digital currencies, whether they satisfy all these functions of money. First is cryptocurrency, all of us would know. Bitcoin is the most prominent one, the first one which has started it all. So cryptocurrency, can we call it a currency? Problem is everybody says that it's a currency. I think, but it's not a medium of exchange. It's not freely accepted. If you want to go to a mall and say, accept my Bitcoin, I don't think it will be accepted. You cannot force them. Whereas no one can reject a currency because it's legal tender. It's a legal tender. Number 2, it's a private currency. It is issued by private. No one knows who is issuing, to be very frank. Who is issuing? Can I say that in the case of currency, you can say Government of India has issued, Reserve Bank of India has issued, because there is a notation, I promise to pay, signed by governor. Every currency note, if you see that, it's signed by governor. Who is signing Bitcoin? I promise to pay. So you can't call cryptocurrency as a currency because it does not perform all the 4 functions. Even the store of value, we have seen it, it was $500 a Bitcoin about 5-6 years ago, went up to $60,000. When China said that they're banning, it came down to $30,000. And again, it goes up. Somebody, US says that we will accept this ETF. Again, comes back to this thing. So it is not a stable state of store of value. When we say store of value, it is not a store of value. So it does not satisfy. It's issued by private currency. Any of the 4 functions, it does not say. It's not issued by the government. So Second type of digital currency is stable currency. So what is stable currency? Because one of the criticism is very volatile. Cryptocurrencies are very volatile, so not suitable for day-to-day kind of exchange. So stable currency, it tried to solve this problem. So what it does, like Facebook, they have this dime. So if I want stable coin, say worth $100, assuming it comes to India, it's 100 rupees. I give 100 rupees, he'll give me stable coin of 100. So only when this rupee or dollar fluctuates, only the stable coins fluctuates. It does not fluctuate like, going from 500 to 60,000 to 30,000, again 60,000. But stable coin again is private, number two. And it is not a medium of exchange. It's not legal tender. You can't force anybody to accept the stable coin. Again, it does not satisfy. Stable coin, I think, very crude example is when people go for a casino or a gambling. They don't exchange currency. They go to that counter, they exchange, they give currency and they get the tokens and they play the tokens, right? Each token is worth, say, $50, $100 and all. Something stable coin is something similar, but it's issued by private currency. But there are other issues. Okay, when he's collecting the money, where is he keeping? Supposing in the case of casino, when I go back, okay, I'm left with 10 coins and all that. Okay, the 10 coins are $50, they'll give me back. Supposing I'm left with stable coins and all that. And if the fellow who has issued stable coins goes bankrupt, it's not like exchange across the counter. So this also cannot be a medium of exchange, store of value. And some people are collecting the money and investing in shares. Some collecting the money and investing in commercial paper. So if there is a default there, obviously my coin also will go. But except that it will try to manage the fluctuations. It will not have fluctuations like Bitcoin. Third most important thing is central bank digital currency, which is issued by the government, which is a medium of exchange. It will be legal tender like any currency. Central bank digital currency is nothing but our currency in a digital form. Just it is a code on your mobile phone. It will perform all the functions that a currency does. So we have these three categories: cryptocurrencies issued by private, do not satisfy any of the functions of money; stable coin issued by private companies, do not satisfy any of the forms of function. And then that's why we have the CBDC. And one of the motivation for many countries to start the CBDCs, because they're worried whether cryptos and the stable coins will dominate the payment system. Then they will have a lot of problems in banking system, monetary policy. One of the motivation, in fact, for central governments in many countries to think of CBDC is to mitigate the risk of these cryptocurrencies and stable coins. So what is the global scenario? We are not the only country. Recently, Bank for International Settlement based at Basel. I'm sure all of you are aware because all your income, asset classification, income recognition norms have come from Basel. All countries have adopted. Now, Basel BIS is also working on common standards and common principles for CBDC, if any country wants to issue. For last 2-3 years, not much interest was there. In fact, actually, last 1.5 years, a lot of interest on thinking of central bank digital currency, because one provocation was cryptocurrency. Second provocation, major provocation, is stable coins. That too being floated by Facebook, which has almost 2 billion users and subscribers on its platform. And it knows all these subscribers very well. And the subscribers are also very comfortable to probably transact on Facebook platform. So in a recent survey, they found out 86% of the countries they surveyed, they are thinking of digital currency, but they're in various stages. Some are doing research, some are doing proof of concept, some are actually doing experiments, some are doing pilots. This is gaining traction. Maybe in 2-3 years' time, I think we are going to see digital currency in a very significant way. In fact, Governor RBI has announced last time in the monetary policy, they are trying to launch a pilot project during the course of this year itself, financial year, calendar year, I'm not sure. So we are going to see a pilot project shortly, maybe in the next few months on CBDC in India as well. So while many countries are jumping into the CBDC bandwagon, the motivations are completely different. for instance, China, their digital payments are very advanced. Their digital payments are very advanced. In fact, 70-80% of the payments are handled by two companies, Alipay and Tencent. So then why China should try for digital currency? Motivation for China is 2-3 things. Number one, of course, is surveillance. Being a communist country, they want to control these people. They want to track who is spending on what, how much, when. Is more as being a communist country, they want to, one reason is surveillance. Number two, earlier payment systems are all run by Reserve Bank of India. Like IDRBT used to run all these payment systems. It's almost like on behalf of RBI. Similarly, China also used to run the payment system, but again, after these Alipay and Tencent when they are found, 90% of the payment systems are run by these two private companies in the country, in China. So China is worried. They have absolutely no idea what is happening in the payment system. And because payment system has implications for monetary policy, banking, even your economic policy, also for any illegal activities and all that may happen. So these people are not having any kind of probably a oversight they're not able to do. And then third is geopolitical risk. Because, whenever there is a conflict between US and any country, first thing that US does is imposes sanctions. So their international trade, international payments, international investments all get blocked because of US. Especially other European countries, they rarely do that kind of sanctions, whereas US imposes sanctions. So geopolitical concerns. So the three reasons for China is surveillance and have a better oversight of the payment system in the economy. Third is basically geopolitical kind of risk. Second type of countries are like Sweden. In fact, the cash usage in Sweden is hardly 2%. Their cash to GDP ratio is only 1 to 2%, whereas ours is about 13 to 14%. Then why Sweden wants to do it? Same reason, they have completely lost oversight of the payment system because entire thing is taken care by the private companies. So, and then second is they're also worried if there is any major attack, cyber attack, in the payment system, 2-3 companies, the whole thing would come to you. Again, Sweden also wants to have an oversight of the payment system because payment system gives an idea of demand and supply of various goods and all. We know that high frequency indicators that we talk of. So they can intervene much more either fiscally or monetarily or any of these their commercial policies and all that, industrial policy, they can intervene by tracking the expenditures, consumption data on a real-time basis. Sweden. So Japan is a completely a different case. In fact, their cash deposit ratio is much higher than even India. It's a highly automated country, so far as other industries is concerned. Japan interest for CBDC comes from a monetary policy end. In Japan, the interest rates are negative. Why they are negative? Because they want people to spend, not save. Because the economy is not picking up in the last 10, 15 years. People are saving because they are worried about their jobs. So they are saving much and spending less. If there is no expenditure, obviously domestic production would come down, the employment would come down, the economy would go. So because of the cycle, in the last 10, 15 years, almost Japanese economy is at a standstill. Almost, even in fact, in some years, it's shrinking. So they're worried. So why they want CBDC? So if there's a negative interest rate, what the Japanese people are doing, they're withdrawing from the bank and keeping it at home. Because they have a high sense of security. At least if they keep it at home, they don't have to pay any charge. They charge 1%, 2%. It's a negative interest rate. So if the CBDC is there, either they pay a negative interest rate or they have to spend money. I think which will help them to revive the economy. So several countries have different motivations and all that. So our motivation is also because basically we want more of financial inclusion and all. Our banking system is developed, but still we have an issue and all. So that briefly is the global scenario. So, but while the motivations from country to country varies, BIS says we should have some common design principles. So what are the design principles? There are 3 design principles. One is anonymity. Second is the coupon. Third is whether it should be token based or account based. What is anonymity? Supposing it is in a digital form issued by a central bank. Supposing Reserve Bank of India maintains an account. So it will keep track of where we are spending, how much we are spending. But many people may not, even though that's legal, may not like to disclose where they're spending, how much they're spending. Why RBI should know? I go and buy some 100 rupees, 200 rupees and biscuits or chocolates and all that kind of stuff. Why? The Reserve Bank should know. Whereas if I pay cash, it's completely anonymous. Nobody knows how much you spend and all that, right? So what are the design principles? They say it should be as anonymous as currency, physical currency, because it is a digital representation of, but there is no, again, consensus whether digital currency should be completely anonymous or partly anonymous. So there is a view up to some value, maybe some 1,000, 2,000, 10,000, it can be anonymous. But for large value transactions, it's not anonymous. Somebody buys, say, 30 lakhs, 40 lakhs kind of gold or say some flat and all that. Why it should be anonymous? So that is the argument going on. So first principle is it should be as far as possible anonymous with some limitations at all. Number two is a coupon. Whether it should have interest rate, because when it is digital form. So if there is an interest rate, there is an implication because people will keep with Reserve Bank rather than the banks because it's more safe and they also pay the interest rate. Then if that happens, there are the implications for the commercial banks, which I'll explain when I come to that. Third design principle is, should it be a token or account based? If it's an account based, accounts will be maintained by Reserve Bank of India. It's impossible for Reserve Bank of India to maintain 1 billion accounts. They need to have this. If it is a token based, they issue a token, it's for commercial banks to take care of this entire accounting basis. So this is the third design principles where still there is no consensus among the countries. And then in terms of models, it can be retail, it can be wholesale, it can be hybrid. Some countries are already doing process on wholesale, transactions between banks. Supposing somebody buys some government securities and all that. So it should be completely digitized because already securities demat, but so far as the money is still concerned, it is still partly digital, partly kind of a thing. So easiest to do wholesale kind of a thing. 4 or 5 countries already joined together and they're doing a pilot project. Retail, I think Reserve Bank of India Deputy Governor announced that most probably they would also do a pilot project so far as retail is concerned. So China is doing experiments on retail. They've already launched it in about 4 cities. But again, retail, few sectors and all. And the hybrid is, you will have digital currency both in retail form as well as wholesale form. Right. So we have discussed about design principles. We have discussed about models. Is that okay? Is the speed okay? Murali Krishna Garu? Is that pace okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Very
Pace is
much
okay.
fine. Good.
Because very
Able
dry
to-
subject. So that,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah.
So why
Yeah,
India
yeah,
should
yes.
go for it? As I said, different countries have to do that. Do we have a case, India, for us, or simply saying that everybody is going for digital currency, let us not go? But India also is a strong case. Even though some people are not finding a much of advantage of the first case is formalize the economy. A CBDC will help us to formalize the economy. What do we mean by formalize the economy? Today, our informal economy, employment, 80% of the employment is in the informal economy. 80%, and they contribute 40%, 45% of the GDP. And government has absolutely no idea of what are the various components of the informal economy at all. So in the case of because it's all cash economy, as we know, informal economy is mostly cash economy. Not that it's illegal, most of it would be legal, like small shops and all that. But government has no idea of the employment potential, employment issues involved there, economic issues involved, sectors which are doing well or not. So if you do CBDC, it will help us to formalize the economy, which contributes almost 45% of the GDP, which is a major component. Even today, when they do the GDP computation, and informal economy is only an estimate. So actually, we don't know what exactly is it. Number 2 advantage why we should do, cost of printing and managing this currency is humongous. Of course, cost of printing is about 4,000 to 5,000 crores for RBI, which is not a major sum at all. But the problem is the moving the currency is so expensive. For example, we have got about 200,000 ATMs across the country. About 60 lakh crores is disbursed in a year, 60 lakh crores. So you have to move 60 lakh crores across the country in thousands of towns and about 6 lakh villages. And as per some estimates, it costs almost 1.7% of GDP. Cost of managing. Printing is not a major one. Moving the cash across these. 1.7% means we have 200 lakh crores of GDP. It almost comes to what? 4 lakh crores is the cost of managing the cash in the system. If you have CBDC, at least 50% if we say, entire thing, still we can say about 1 lakh, 2 lakh crores. I'll give you an example of this ATM happens. Supposing earlier ATM, if I want to do some shopping, I'll go to an ATM, say draw 25,000 rupees, spend money in the malls and shops and all. It takes, and then that fellow will put in the bank and the bank puts in the ATM. Again, I go and draw the money. So merry-go-round, about 60 lakh crores is happening. You can know how secure, how costly it is to move the cash. So the cost of moving the cash is estimated as per some RBI report and also some international reports, 1.7% of the GDP, which comes to about close to 4 lakh crores. So we can save a lot of money if we have a CBDC. And then the impact on GDP, because the velocity of the money would go up. And again, as per some estimates, international estimates, GDP, it will contribute to 1.3% of GDP if you have CBDC. That means almost another 2 lakh crores advantage to the economy. Tax evasion, you are a better judge whether CBDC will help to curb the tax evasion. But it's believed that the tax evasion in the country is about 3.2%. But to me, it's an underestimate because still we have a lot of cash transactions, some of these sectors and all. So if you have CBDC, they say 3.2% that tax that is being avoided can be saved. Another is that corruption, illegal activities, but I don't believe that it will completely go away. Even they'll find indigenous methods to do that. Second, it also helps to improve the efficiency of the payment system, even though we have UPI and all that, but in a CBDC, you will find that interbank settlements and all that much more faster, real-time online, that will improve. Next is the worry is the big tech. Big tech means your Google, Facebook, all these guys are getting into the payment system and also slowly into the economy. And they are also trying to come with their own stable currencies. So when once it's not about taking over the payment system, that also has implications for our economy and all that. We are already seeing the big tech almost dominates our UPI payment system. And then next one is, even though UPI we have done very well, we have about almost 3.5 billion transactions, about 6 lakh crores. But there are only 200 million unique users. Only 200 million people are using a number of transactions and all that. So we still have a potential to at least to multiply it by 4 times, 800 million. So CBDC is believed that it will help us to probably touch almost 700, 800 million people in this country. And another is, even though we have done a lot of progress in the digital payments, our digital payments per capita are only 50 as against 600 in Singapore, even with the UPI. So there is a limit up to which UPI can also grow. So the only solution is, I think, CBDC. So these are about 10, 11 use cases for India go for CBDC, because Bank for International Settlement said each country has got to find out its own use case. Because as I said, China is different, Japan is different, Sweden is different. Similarly, US is different. US is not showing much interest for CBDC so far. So case for Russia, Korea, all these countries, different variations. Like, for instance, El Salvador, they have gone for that because they don't have a payment system. It's already dollarized economy. Their banking system has not improved. Some like Nigeria, the payment system is very rudimentary, very primitive. The banking system is primitive. Whereas it is not the case so far as India is concerned. We have very well developed banking system. We have very well developed payment system, but still you have our own use case. Why the use case is important? Because the design principles accordingly we need to set it. So what are the implications for central bank? Next one. So it depends on the design principles. One is, supposing if it is coupon, there is a coupon interest rate, 1%, 2%. Majority of the people would prefer to keep the money with the Reserve Bank of India, because we know we have a lot of banking crisis and all that. Even we have a lot of rumors. Even when the FSRDC bills come, a lot of people were standing in the queue to withdraw the money from the banks and all that. So if there's a coupon, there can be major shift of money from commercial banks to Reserve Bank of India. So if commercial banks lose deposits, their power to lend also comes down. So if their power to lend comes down, it impacts our GDP growth. You can't go to Reserve Bank of India for a car loan or a housing loan because in a country of our size. So the people are, one of the worry is that if it is not properly designed, it can disintermediate banks. So if there is a coupon, it can disintermediate the banks, it can disturb the financial stability, economic stability of this country. And then whether it is retail based or account based, the retail based, the token based or account based. If it's account based, again, it goes to Reserve Bank of India. Then what do the central banks do? So disintermediation is a big risk if the design principles are not properly designed, accepted. But these can be mitigated because you can have limits up to which you will issue digital currency, because both physical currency, digital currency, bank deposits all should coexist. And similarly, Reserve Bank of India should not maintain the accounts. It should be said only Reserve Bank would, commercial banks only will do on behalf of RBI, a design principles and all. So if these design principles are properly done, the negative impact on the banking system can be mitigated. Today, I'll give you an example. There are about 28 lakh crores of cash in the system, right? But there are 145 lakh crores of deposit in the banking. So just to digitize 28 lakh crores, so we should not disturb 145 lakh crore deposit in the system. If we disturb the deposits, you are going to disturb the lending of the system as well. So the negative implications of the banks can be mitigated if the design principles are smartly thought of. The other one is, of course, the monetary policy implications again linked to the design principles. In the sense, if there is an interest bearing, people would opt for, again, Reserve Bank of India, not monetary, not the commercial banks. And the commercial bank would lose deposits, and then it will impact again the financial stability and the financial stability of this country. So whatever design principles we do, we should not disturb the deposit of the banking system, the lending system, the financial system of the country. You can at best have some, think of some advantages, save some, the cost that runs because of the huge money that has to be transported across 600,000 villages, 6 lakh villages and this, and discourage use of ATM, because the ATM is one of the main culprit for the massive cost of this cash management system in this country. Third use case, they say cross-border. Cross-border payments, as per World Bank study, cost 6.8% for any remittance, international remittance, which is very high. And it's very slow. It takes 3 days, 4 days. And then there are too many layers. There is correspondent bank between two paying bank and receive bank. So almost it has 4 or 5 kind of channels that it goes to. So it is CBDC can help to cut down this time. Maybe from 3 days, 4 days, it can come down to even 1 day. The cost of remittance, which is about 6.8%, can be brought down to about 1%, cross-border payment. And this is very important for India because we get remittance, inward remittance about $80 billion. So ultimately, the customers have to pay very heavy charges. And most of these people are from Gulf countries who are basically not from very high income segments and all. BIS already is working out 3 models, various models and corridors between various countries to do cross-border payments through CBDC would happen. So another 10 minutes, I'll stop, Murali Krishna Garu, then we can have questions.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay.
So given this so much of uncertainty, design principles are not settled, as I told you. There's still a debate and research is going on. Whatever you do, Bank for International Settlement has given 3 broad guidelines. They said whatever form you want to have CBDC, see that it does not harm the financial stability, it does not harm the monetary system, it does not impact the bank intermediation, number 1. Number 2, guiding principle, they said it should coexist with all the existing systems, payment systems, physical cash, It's not that when CBDC comes that physical cash will disappear. Still, there will be some percentage of cash which will be in a physical form. Third thing is, they said guiding principle, have a public-private partnership in the CBDC process. Right now in cash, it's all done by the government, done by RBI, because there is a lot of technology involved, there's a lot of scope for innovation. That's where the technology companies in the private sector can help. So BIS said, keep these three broad principles, whatever form you want to issue CBDC, right? So what we need to do in case we want to introduce, there's a lot of legal work to do. First, we need to have a data privacy law. We don't have a data privacy law. In fact, a lot of data is misused. I'm sure you are reading everyday stories about how our data is used by Google, Facebook, and all these guys. Data privacy we need. And we need, number two, a cryptocurrency bill. And number three, we need a legal framework. I mean, there is a view that present Reserve Bank of India Act, there is no provision to issue currency in digital form. They need to do that. Then they have to declare CBDC also as a legal tender. And we need a big institutional framework, because the present institutional framework we have, like RBI and the banks, is not enough, because the currency would be moving seamlessly between banks, consumers, the merchants, internally, even externally. So we need a new institutional framework to do that. We need more governance mechanisms. So these broadly, I think, are the 10 points I've told you. I've discussed the several motivations. I've discussed about design principles. I've discussed about why India should go for it. And if India should go for it, what are the implications for banking system, monetary policy, and then what we need to do in case you want to do it. So I've not discussed about whether you should invest in cryptocurrency or not. I know that in some of the webinars, that is the most often asked question. So I'm done with my presentation. It's at 6 o'clock, so I've done this. So I stop here. So you want to Dr. Abhishek to start, or we'll see Q&A if anything is there, or we'll do after.
I will see any questions from members. Accordingly, we'll proceed, sir. Thanks a lot for your lucid presentation, sir. It's really nice presentation, crisp and informative, thoroughly covered. So members, any queries, you can unmute yourself. You can ask directly.
I will overview because it takes a lot of time. Yes, please.
Any queries, members? You can put it in the chat box, or you can ask directly to the speaker by unmuting yourself.
Not there, no problem. Dr. Abhishek can take over.
Yes. Abhishek ji, please go ahead with your session, sir.
Thank you.
Let us see
Krishna.
question and answer, sir. Sir, you will be staying with us, sir?
Yes, I'll be staying on and off.
Oh,
when question is there.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
On and off,
Okay, sir.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot, sir.
And all the best to all the members. Fine. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Being a faculty, I'm used to more of a presentation, so I will rely on a presentation. And just to set the perspective, I am a second-hand practitioner of blockchain and distributed ledgers. So in the sense, while I am engineering aspects and all, I am pretty much on top of it. IDRBT, the domain expert, unluckily could not give the presentation today, so I am stepping in on his behalf. Okay, just let me shut up. I'm sure all of you would have heard of distributed ledgers and blockchain. One thing we believe is it should be interactive. Any thoughts? Are the same, different? One is a superset, or they have some intersection. What comes to your mind when we talk of distributed ledgers versus blockchain? Any thoughts? Please feel free to put in message. So presentation is visible. Can you please confirm if it's showing up?
Yes, sir. It's visible.
Additionally, the title is Distributed Ledger Technology and Blockchain. So a very quick answer, distributed ledger technology actually is a superset. Blockchain is one application. And within blockchain, cryptocurrency, for example, what we had some discussions with Sambamurthy sir, is one application. Central bank digital currency or digital currencies need not always use DLT or blockchain. We have to be clear about it. Majority of the implementations may rely on DLT, but need not be. Now, as we go further, some of these things should get clarified. Okay, just a moment. My animation is getting impacted. Okay, let me stay with it. I can't help right now, but later we will fix it. So very, very quick way of introducing blockchain in 2 minutes. And don't worry, we have much more discussion after this because that is where it should get demystified. After this 1 hour discussion, you are not feeling at loss when somebody is talking of distributed ledgers and blockchain. Remember, right now I'm picking blockchain, which is a subset of distributed ledger. Blockchain is a shared digital ledger wherein transactions can be recorded and verified without a central authority to oversee the transaction. Now, a lot of these things also get into audits and similar procedures, so you may be able to appreciate much better than what I can do as a technologist. But from technology domain, let us revisit the shared part once. Shared, we'll talk of central, and then distributed ledger technology talks of DLT, distributed, right? Central was our CBS and similar solutions where we have a database which is centrally managed. Distributed in a broad way is having multiple replicas, but the challenge is if you have more than one copy, when you update, it becomes a big issue, right? Shared, on the other hand, says it need not be geographically separated or distributed, but it is shared across some systems. The other aspect about blockchain is transactions have to be confirmed by all participants on the network. And once recorded, they cannot be modified. They're secure, relatively secure. Security is not an absolute term, right? Can never be, but it's relatively secure from revision and tampering. Very difficult to revise or tamper it. One of the benefits it brings in is what we call as de-risking our systems. We can reduce our regulatory compliance costs and increase transparency if we design the solution right. Now, obviously, not all solutions will help us with DLT and RegTech, classical example of emerging fintech theme. And not all of them will increase transparency. In fact, we may not want transparency for many applications also, privacy being a big concern, for example. Sambamurthy sir was just talking about GPDR and similar things. So given this premise, if you look at Vitalik Buterin is one of the founders of an implementation of blockchain called Ethereum. I'm borrowing his words. It says blockchain has its maths, it has its computer science, it has its cryptography, and it has its economics. In addition, it has its political and social philosophy. So given that the way it is sort of being set up with so many competing fields, a single expertise, a pure tech expertise, a pure policy expertise, a pure financial expertise or economic expertise will not help us exploit it in the best manner. So it needs to be well understood from multiple perspectives. And obviously, when you look at it, it's not that simple, right? We're talking of more domains. So it's not just 2-minute introduction that I wanted to push through. Before I go with the broader agenda for today, this is Gartner's hype cycle. We have been following it for the last 3-4 years. What you will notice is right now we are getting smart contracts somewhere towards maturity. Smart contract is the one that brings business logic to run on top of distributed ledgers. There are a few other things. For example, for auditing and other things, we may want authenticated governance. This is still shaping up. Probably we will have more challenges in the next 2 years before we start looking at it becoming more stable. In contrast, cryptocurrency, very hot, is already out of this. So they are sort of on this plateau of becoming mainstream. Wallets and other things are also mainstream. Consensus slowly getting towards mainstream. Is it getting too technical? I can scale it back. So please keep it interactive in that manner. So what we will discuss in the next 45 odd minutes, we will look at how and why of blockchain, different categories that exist in the distributed ledger realm. We will also look at few challenges. We will also discuss when not to use distributed ledger or blockchain. And then there are 3 use cases. I may only touch one in sense of time. And briefly borrow a reference to the stocks of when we do audits. This is a sort of a RegTech aspect of ensuring distributed ledgers being used for auditing. So why did distributed ledger or blockchain come into play? Remember, this has got worldwide implications. Satoshi Nakamoto, who wrote the first theoretical implementation to practical implementation, was primarily targeting disintermediation. If you do not want any government, any country to control your deployment, is it possible? Break out the centralized control. This is purely opposite of what a regulator like RBI or a government may want to do. But keep in mind, this is not same as the Parrot Group and others. The intentions can still be noble. Now, biggest challenge in internet realm is what we call as double spending. In physical world, if I give a book to Murli Krishna ji, he has it, right? But in a cyber or an internet, if I send him an email, what happens? He has a copy, I have a copy. Who is the owner? So ownership of an asset in a cyber world is a very challenging task. Typically, how do we achieve it? We have the centralized approach, right? A library book issued to me, I return it, it gets issued to somebody else. Similarly, ownership records can be digitized and placed with either Government of India, CERSAI, whatever it is, right? But that is a centralized approach. Can we do it without involving a central entity that we don't trust? That is the primary question that early versions of distributed ledgers and blockchain targeted. And to a good extent, they have solved it. So if we look at it, how industry and technology realm is shaping up, 10 years back, 15 years back, we had a lot of closed and centralized systems. By closed, we mean only IBM or only a specialist organization may know about it. And generally, they are run centrally. Present day era, we have more and more open systems. We are talking of APIs, we are deploying things in cloud. Typical cloud deployment even today is centralized. There may be 30 data centers in our country or 30 locations, but most of them will be around 2 or 3 metros. Now, future we are talking of, and this is an increasing trend in the last years, further accelerating, is other than being open and API based, the cloud itself is splitting into multi-cloud, decentralization, and so forth. So even the enterprise side of things, be it Amazon, Facebook, are looking at shifting from a central big data center to decentralized distributed presence. How does blockchain work? The same thing can be taken with DLT, but remember, DLT can work with block of data or may work with single entry at a time. So that is why we said DLT is a superset, blockchain is a subset. We have pages in ledgers. The same assumption can be made. One column of the page has some mathematical hash, and the whole page hash is calculated. And the first entry on the next page will be the hash of the previous page. Now, what are hashes? Again, not going too mathematical. Hash refers to computing in a manner that, okay, is my voice still a problem, or is it okay with most of you?
Sometimes it is disconnecting, sir. Sometimes a break is coming, maybe due to network issue.
Fine. So if it is still a problem, I can see if I can get a
No,
headphone.
most of the times it is okay, sir. Good.
Okay, thank you.
Only few times. Okay.
Sure. So hashing refers to creating a mathematical function so that even if I change one character, one byte or one entry, it will end up changing multiple bits or bytes in the hash. And mathematically very sound, difficult to break. There are some foundation principles there. Now what happens is every time a set of entries in a page is going to create a block, a consensus has to happen across all the participating nodes. What do we mean by nodes? If there are 10 parties or 200 parties, they have to all agree that fine, these 17 entries with the previous page entry of X and these 17 entries as further things, final hash computed is so and so. Now in fair world, when everybody plays correctly, computing of hash should not be a problem. But remember, we do not have a central entity watching us. So that is where more algorithm and more implementations had to be made to ensure people cannot become unfair. In the sense, if more than half the people agree to something, the system will continue to work. So that is where consensus comes into play. It can be majority consensus, it can be 76% consensus. Again, the rules can vary based on the deployment. And because we are distributing data and sharing it across multiple parties, some of which may be competing in the real world, a single entity changing it by itself, the other majority will say, no, your entry is wrong. What is the correct entry is this set. This becomes tamper evident. Corruption in few copies will be noticed. But what happens if majority becomes corrupt? Then we do not have a solution there. So quickly recap what I said. Data of block has a reference as well. And generally, the next block will have reference to the previous block's data. And the whole thing can be hashed and put as a reference here. So this chain keeps on building. Each of them is a block, and over time we have what we call as blockchain. Now, few principles on which it works. Distributed database, it's not centralized. By distributed, we mean, let us say that it can be in case of say Bitcoin, it's actually can be running on any computer that people are going to contribute to the Bitcoin community to mine and so forth. But there could be other scenarios like NPCI or SWIFT transactions when international currency movement is involved. Probably each of the major participating bank in the SWIFT consortium would have a copy of database on which consensus continues to happen. There will be peer-to-peer transmission. It will never happen that we have to report to a central entity and then the central entity reports to all. Everybody talks to everybody. Because of this, also the blockchain has higher communication overhead. Many of the systems, not all of them, will ensure privacy is there along with transparency. Pseudo-anonymity as well as transparency, sort of competing goals. You want to be anonymous, but the overall system has to be self-auditing or able to show to the world that it has not been tampered. Irreversibility of records. This is a very strong principle that blockchain works on. It's what we call as append-only data schema. You can only append to it, you cannot go and update anything. Which means if we have wrongly entered a transaction, we will have to do another transaction to correct it. And the last part is the one that brings in more automation on it, computational logic. The term that you may get to hear is smart contracts. So whenever a new transaction is coming in, the business logic of it can be automated and run as part of blockchain or distributed ledger. That is called smart contracts. These are the 5 strong differentiators of, say, blockchain when we compare to a database like MySQL, Oracle, and so forth. A typical transaction flow, pictorial representation. Any client, say a wallet for a Bitcoin or a loan application or KYC, could be a transaction request coming in. It hits one of the nodes which are participating in the blockchain network. It will be broadcasted to all the nodes in a peer-to-peer manner. The nodes will use some algorithm to compute and finalize the transaction. So a verified transaction can involve cryptocurrency contracts, records, or other information. A land record being transferred, a mortgage being taken, and so forth. Now, multiple such transactions would be combined and as a bulk verified and put on our block for the ledger. So a new block or ledger would be created by combining multiple of these such transactions. This new block gets added to the blockchain, and then the requester of the transfer transaction can also verify that their transaction is on the blockchain. This whole flow may happen within a second, within sub-second or microsecond also, or in case of, say, Bitcoin, it may even take 10 minutes or slightly more. Now, what are some of the benefits we are getting? Many of these references are coming from a World Bank reference study in 2016. So one thing is it's peer-to-peer network. It does not need enterprise class, very high-end servers. So probably we can lower our cost. Probably, again, that's the term I'm using. If the nodes are too many, we may not be able to get this benefit. We can increase transparency. We can have better security and faster settlement. So other than shared distributed ledger, consensus mechanism, cryptographic primitives, smart contracts are what will help us achieve this. And secure transactions will be stored in a distributed ledger. So now I will spend some time on identity of nodes, identity of enterprises, and then we will look at types of distributed ledgers. Any end user that is going to transact on the system will need an identity. We know that with UPI or wallets, typically our phone number is our identity. Similarly, in the distributed ledger term, there has to be some identity created. And for that identity, there should be a private key retained only by that entity and a public key published to all the participants on the network. But membership service, or who provides a mapping of identity to the public key, is crucial because that decides whether we will have anonymity or we will not have anonymity. And if we end up losing the private key, our identity is lost or compromised. Fine. With this very basic set of idea of what is identity with respect to distributed ledgers, let us look at the three broad categories: public distributed ledgers, Bitcoin, a classical example; private, something running within a bank or consortium, probably a group of banks or a group of industry sectors coming together and running it. While they compete in the real world, they collaborate and share their details over this distributed ledger. In a public blockchain, there has to be some incentive for people to participate in consensus and maintain the copy of data. If there is no incentive, things will not stay stable. Everybody will just do the transaction and not worry about agreeing to others' transactions. This is where proof of work and other reasons why we say that distributed ledgers or Bitcoin is energy inefficient. Because when somebody agrees to all the previous work, they are actually earning something in the process. And to make the game fair, some proof has to be given that you have not cut corners and so forth. And that makes it very power inefficient. In the private deployment of blockchain, and typically this is within an organization or within an enterprise, we have some entity which we can trust, and they end up giving us the membership service. So that central trust provides the membership service. So it's not pure distributed anymore. Only the public implementations are pure distributed. Rest of them start having some level of centralization. So this is not fully distributed. And what we have seen so far, this report was from 2016, but last 5 years, what we are seeing, majority of productive real world systems will fall in private or consortium scenarios. Smart contracts, the business logic part of it, runs on top of distributed ledger technology. As transactions happen, this contract will help us audit and enforce the business logic. Now, when we are running within a distributed ledger, what is happening to the external world? This is where what we call as interface with world beyond the distributed ledger. Anything that is on the ledger, everybody has agreed, right? So let us say that we are having a betting game running on a distributed ledger. Will a wicket fall on 4th delivery of 5th over? Somebody is betting on it. People have bet with multiple dimensions. Now, did the wicket really fall? Did it not fall? This is an event that is happening outside of the distributed ledger. How do we get this truth reflected in? Or an insurance case, if the flight is delayed beyond 30 minutes, right? How do we bring this real world event into distributed ledger is a bit of a challenge, irrespective whether we are public, private, or consortium. And that needs special focus. So now we will look at how different ways the blockchain is being applied or deployed. In sense of the audience, I will not go too detailed here, but remember, this is where we have the model of partnerships, in-house, external partner, or consortium, whether it's open or private. Then whether we are looking at improving process or new market creation. For most of you, as a participant, you are looking at process improvements, probably at speed, quality, and trust being higher. Obviously, risk being lower. As chartered accountants, I think the group will be interested in almost all of it. We cannot pick and choose any specific area, but any thoughts? Which one looks most interesting to you? Yeah, there can be disruption coming though. We have to be very careful. Will the accounting and audit process get disrupted? Will there be a new market segment coming up? We really don't know. Some of this out of the box thinking can be very radical or not so expected for us. So where to use and where not to use, this is what we are discussing now. Do we need only one copy of the ledger? If you are a small enterprise and you want to control the flow of information, you don't want anybody else to know about details. The classical old movies, Bania or whoever was selling or running a shop, right? You will only have one ledger. You really don't need blockchain or distributed ledger, right? If you are willing to have more than one copies, who can have these copies? That is the next question we have. If it's a group ownership, if all the members of the board of an entity or all the CXOs or whatever you have decided, if there is a group that we have created, probably we are talking of permission, private shared ledger. A few examples like bank chain, clearing house in financial realm. Certificates could be another good example. Who can keep certificates? We are talking of academic certificates, right? Things like that might be permissioned. Now, how do we make sure that it's not just the copies? Anyone can have a copy, but we want to make sure that it's always correct or integrity is achieved, right? So this is where we are getting towards public or permissioned public. So if we say that trusted ledger owned, there are owners or actors which are always going to be verified before they're allowed to come in. So there is a membership to a consortium or to a group. Like the Vizag chapter could be a members only session, right? In that case, we are looking at permissioned public shared ledger. It's not within a single enterprise, but it's a permission Swift is another good example. Or if anybody, anywhere in the world, that is where we get into cryptocurrencies, Bitcoins, and so forth. And this because it is untrusted users which may have competing goals. They may not want to be playing fair. Gets inefficient while trying to isolate such elements which may not be following the rules. So now we will discuss a little bit on what we are getting and what are the costs we are paying. If we want to decentralize or disintermediate, basically we do not want any central entity. We are opening up all public, assuming that they will not play fair all the time, which is the truth, right? Nobody will have a incentive to be fair all the time. Even the best of the people would have some incentive to not play fair once in a while. That is where we start getting into algorithms which are very complex, power inefficient, so they do not have sustainability in the long run. There were news articles that the amount of power we are spending on a blockchain, Bitcoin network is much higher than small countries in Europe. Not the very small, we are not talking of Luxembourg and all, probably Scotland or even slightly larger countries. The second aspect, there is greater transparency and possibly easier auditability, but this comes at a cost of possible loss in privacy. Remember, we can only append, we cannot delete or update prior records, which means I will never be forgotten on the network. If somebody leaks that this is a wallet belonging to Abhishek Thakur, everybody in the world will know forever what are the transactions I have done. Right? There are mechanisms to have this privacy hidden. So I need not have a single wallet ID. There will be tokenization and other aspects to provide security there. But basic simple implementation, more transparent, easier to audit, but lacks privacy. Then automation and programmability. This is the smart contracts. They can be modified and they can actually be flexible to adapt to emerging business processes. So today GST is X, tomorrow GST becomes Y. Right now, we may have to be updating multiple systems, but assuming we have it through a distributed ledger or similar mechanism, all we have to do is change and attribute value in smart contract. Immutability and verifiability along with transparency. So transparency comes back here. Immutability is it cannot be modified. Verifiability is it can look at the previous relationships and details or link to the previous block and so forth. And transparency always because multiple people have the copy. We will gain speed and efficiency, costs should ideally reduce. So these are the things we start getting with consensus or private and permissioned blockchains, not with the public blockchains. Enhanced cyber security resilience. So today, if our central server is hacked, let us say somebody is able to hack our central server and modify it. In case of distributed ledger, they will have to be able to compromise majority of our systems. Just one small one or two node compromise will not be enough. Typically 51% or higher level compromise would be needed. And they are mostly consensus based, transactional in nature. So it's not like we can have non-transactional details easily captured. They're not easy to do. Now, the new term that has been very hot of late is what we call as DAO, distributed autonomous organizations. So physical entities can become virtual forms and entities running on top of such distributed ledgers with their business logic and so forth. Any questions so far? So again, because the reference
questions, you can interact with speaker because it's the interactive session much more.
Otherwise, it will be a monologue. I will put you all to sleep.
Any of your questions you can ask in the middle of the session itself. Even speaker is initiating like that. So you don't need to wait till the end of the session. Members, interact with the speaker so that we'll have a lively session.
Yeah, it's not just the credits, by the way, right? 2 years from now, you should be remembering at least some of the terms we have discussed.
Yes. Any queries, members?
So to what extent this will affect the auditing professionals?
That I have put one slide. I am not on top of it fully. Truly, I had only a day or two to look at these things. So I have not been, we will, through discussion, we may get better at it. So once I get to that slide, let us discuss some more.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, but traditional process, and this is, remember, coming from Commonwealth reference. So Commonwealth Bank of Australia, actually. Traditional process lacked a few things, and blockchain with smart contract can automate quite a lot. Another term entered here is Internet of Things. Let us not get distracted by that. But transparent, cost efficient, customizable, convenient, secure. Where are the various places where it can be used in the financial sectors? Obviously, even Samamurthy sir had mentioned about how we deal with currency payments and so forth. That is a big bucket. Then financial services and infrastructure beyond payments, capital markets, commodities, notarization, collaterals, supply chain financing, syndicated loans, crowdfunding, insurance, and so forth. Collaterals comes up here again. On our internal efficiencies, we can use it quite a lot. In fact, there are aspects that are being talked of, say, rather than one big bang audit, can we do continuous audits? So can we re-architect our systems to be compliant on week by week basis and things like that? Again, there could be efficiencies gained or warnings triggered even earlier than end of quarter audits, for example. So DLT can probably augment that process flow. Identity, quite a lot of work has happened and continues to happen around it. Remember, with wallets and other things, we are able to create identities, and then certificates and other things can be managed off it. Trade commerce, a big set of impact, especially cross-country trade and so forth. Agriculture, governance. In fact, RegTech is another small field, large field, not small. RegTech is another large impact field that we are looking at. Healthcare and then humanitarian aid. When we are doing a DBT or when post-pandemic a group of volunteers were sending money to migrant laborers, was it really reaching there? We didn't have a solution when the pandemic happened. But if at all it happens next time, I'm sure we will be able to leverage distributed ledgers for better impact. So I'm just quickly covering the broad categories here, and then we will go a bit more in discussion mode with probably audit as an example. Global payments, let me skip this. Insurance, let us go with processing as a use case in insurance. So distributed ledgers can facilitate claims management either for property or casualty, and DLT automates the whole process, right? We can have better assessment. We can look at historical claims. We can make sure duplicate claims are not being raised and so on. Through supporting data sources, what are the multiple parties getting involved here? The beneficiary, the insurer, the reinsurer, the regulator, the broker. Obviously, the documents with respect to damage and other things may come from local administration. Probably they are coming from satellite feed or other means. Now, whenever we have such multi-parties coming together in a process flow, distributed ledger will help us get them talking to each other, minimizing the gaps or minimizing the security risks in this communication. Similar thing with trade refinance or trade finance. All the way from correspondent banks, importers, importing bank, exporter, export bank, inspection company, the freight organization, be it shipping to the roads, customs, everybody is engaged here. How do we monetize the whole flow for better return for all the parties? How can we ensure that the customs guys are able to track things faster and organize the resources? If there is more surge of freight coming in, can we organize our physical resources to better handle the freight? And so forth. Also, this helps bring in records for the importer over long period of time. So trust factors, data mining abilities will also increase. Syndicated loan, when multiple people are coming together, underwriting syndicated loan again is a very simple use case. In fact, a lot of existing projects demo it. They demo it in a small way. It's not enterprise class ready, but there are multiple implementations existing today. Automated compliance, which is the closest to audit from this reference that I'm picking. We can utilize distributed ledger to store financial information. Thus, we eliminate errors associated with manual audit activities. We improve efficiency, reduce reporting costs, and potentially support deeper regulatory oversight in future. Now, today, when we are doing audits, typically once we have the books, if we find some issues, probably the current process, we may raise questions and the entity being audited may come back and revise their books themselves. If their books are being maintained on distributed ledger, they may not be able to revise. They will actually have to add entries or delete to compensate for the change, add few more entries. So, but then again, process can be updated to handle this in a manner to work on distributed ledgers. Proxy voting, equity post-trade, and then asset rehypothecation. Using the same collateral for multiple places could be used. Fine, while this talked of broad areas, we will look at on a distributed ledger, if we are setting it up. Again, you may not be concerned, but you should be aware of what happens behind the scene. There is somebody who is setting it up. So there is a system administrator who decides who can access the network, sort of who can be members, how many nodes they will have, software updates and all those things. So the policy setting for running the system is to the system administrator. Then there is somebody who is asset issuer. Remember, we are converting physical assets to, you can say demat assets, but digital assets. Ensuring that they are not duplicated. Can they be split? Can they not be split? All those things comes as part of the asset digitization process. For a new transaction, there has to be a proposer, somebody who is adding a transaction into the network. Proposer may or may not add a genuine transaction. I may only have 50 rupees, but I have tried to pay 55. The system should reject saying that you are doing an invalid transaction. That is where validator comes into play. As a role within distributed ledger, they validate the entries. And then the auditor would view the ledger, but it's not allowed. Remember, this is not the regular auditor in the real world. The audit role within distributed ledger. They only perform audits. They cannot modify things. So regulators, supervisors can be playing this role. Or even probably in future, we are talking of chartered accountants and others getting to play this role in the cyber realm. Now, these are some of the implementation examples. Bitcoin, many of us know. Ethereum, you may be aware of. This is one of the most widely deployed platform other than Hyperledger projects. Hyperledger Fabric is another big project, initially coming from IBM, but open source today. Ripple, this is coming with focus on enterprise and banking in general. Corda actually has been more of a banking focused implementation. This originates from financial institutes themselves. Many of them are open source. Corda is open source, Fabric is open sourced, Ethereum is open sourced. Ripple is actually not open source solution. Quickly recapping challenges, and these challenges are where the technology is still evolving. If we scale on the number of participants, if we are allowing 2,000 entities to be part of a network, consensus will become very costly because everybody has to talk to everybody. Transactions per second may start coming down. So scalability with respect to number of entities as well as number of transactions per second. Distributed ledgers are still not as fast in throughput, say, as with respect to databases and transaction processing systems like Oracle and others. On security, all said and done, we still know that software has some perennial bugs. The best of the software we later find that they had some issues, right? Because software has bugs and it needs to evolve and change over time. It's still not having full finality as we have with, say, paper currency. A paper note, we know it has that value, right? Unless it is forged, and if we have a decent enough mechanism to figure out forged notes, we are much more secure in that perspective. Software, on the other hand, with its modifications and changes happening over time, is not as rigid, I would say. With respect to data, both privacy and identity protection is a challenge. We cannot expect right to be forgotten on a distributed ledger. The other aspect, thanks to what has been happening in the last 5-10 years, be it Panama Papers, be it Edward Snowden or so forth, we know eventually even in a permission setup, data will be exposed. So we have to be prepared for the fact that eventually all our data is getting disclosed sooner than later. Also, in the next 3 to 5 years, because quantum computing seems to be getting more and more prevalent, today we may not be able to run systems in server mode like quantum computers, but there are countries that are having multiple quantum computers running. Our current encryption algorithms, the mathematical foundations, would be questioned because quantum computers will be able to decode them much faster. So there is a risk coming because of that. Probably the private keys we use today will be broken in a matter of hours 5 years from now. The fourth aspect, and this is the reality of the world, the best of the design, the best of the solution may not be deployed optimally or may not be used optimally. So intentional and unintentional misuse, poor deployment choices taken, or even inefficient design during the deployment, the architecture, can increase our cost significantly. And then regulatory adaptation. While our parliament and other places, we have been debating about using distributed ledgers for a while. And while few countries have made the jump, still people are vetting it out. Industry standards are evolving as we speak. Especially on the permissioned or consortium, I think we are making a lot of progress. On public blockchain, there is lack of legal clarity, lack of ownership, lack of jurisdiction. So that challenge will be pretty huge. And possibly that is why RBI has not been as supportive of, say, a Bitcoin. Obviously, it undermines a central banker, but in addition to that, lack of ownership, jurisdiction, all those things are a big challenge. And recourse mechanism, there is really no recourse mechanism other than putting another transaction. And now the second transaction that is being put in, will it be accepted by all parties? A bit of a challenge. So reversal of wrong transactions is a limiting factor that other systems may support. Security with respect to what we call as denial of service or distributed denial of service. Remember I said, if more than half the nodes are compromised, we may be able to undo transactions or do transactions in a different manner. So if majority nodes somehow get compromised or have an ownership that belong to a particular entity with a particular motive, we may lose integrity, we may lose confidentiality and other aspects. Maturity aspect itself, with respect to both standardization, interoperability, and integration across different deployments, across different frameworks, is a big challenge. And then in public blockchain, multiple challenges exist. We may not be able to know our customer. For example, wallet ID given to us to which we are donating money or we are receiving, sending money mostly. How do you do a KYC for somebody who is sitting half the way across the world? Is it really their wallet? Is it somebody else's wallet? all those challenges can exist because there is no repository linking the wallet to an identity in the physical world. So customer due diligence cannot be done on public blockchain. This is prone to 51% attack, and privacy is either closed or open to all. There is no, either we have 100% privacy or no privacy, the way you look at it. With advanced tools, US government or maybe even Indian intelligence, we may be able to reverse some data, which means it's open to all, or we may not be able to do anything at all. So fundamental costs are high. And then with respect to governance, accountability and enforcement on the public blockchain are continuing to be challenges. So few recent effort, successful effort, I would say, are around looking at validating identities of counterparties, limiting visibility of transaction on a need to know basis. So there are newer cryptographic algorithms that allow only part of data to be known to others, not to everybody. For example, if the regulator needs to know that and have access to transactions, they will not be modifying it obviously, but they can view it. They get visibility as a regulator. But a third party, say a purchaser, may not be able to see other transactions from the supplier. Things like that can be enforced with visibility. There have been attempts to make sure what we are writing in smart contracts and what is part of legal prose is having an equivalence coming into play. So more and more, the legal terminology being used is written keeping in mind that they can be implemented as smart contracts. The ambiguities are being sort of reduced so that machines can run it. Industry standardization is improving, so even existing industry standards, software and tools are getting used. Interoperability has been attempted. For example, Hyperledger Fabric providing data that will be used by Ethereum and vice versa. Such things have started to happen. And multiple consensus models have been implemented. Remember, proof of work that works in public blockchain like Bitcoin, we have already discussed, is not a good solution because it wastes a lot of energy. On the other hand, if you have a private network, say Swift or even NPCI ends up doing a multi-party network in future, they will use a different consensus algorithm, which is more power efficient. Okay, so if I'm not putting you all to sleep, let me see if I can increase the font size here. Just discuss KYC as an input and then skip the next two use cases. We will jump to audits. Is it visible or shall I zoom in a bit?
A bit zoom it is better, sir.
Fine. So what we're discussing is identity or know your customer. I will just increase the presentation size so that
you can maximize the screen, sir.
no, I had done that, but it didn't help. I will just zoom it in this manner that. Oh, sorry, wrong slide.
No, in the down, there is a percentage there. No, sir. There you can.
Acha, during presentation, I can do it?
At the bottom. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'm also
Yes,
learning something here.
At the bottom, yeah.
Zoom, huh?
At the bottom scale is there, sir. Percentage of this thing.
When I'm presenting, I'm not able to see maybe.
Yeah, now it is okay.
Now is it okay? Fine.
Okay.
So we're looking at providing multiple benefits if we use distributed ledger for identity. So if the identity is on a distributed ledger, it's available to multiple entities. That is the premise we have. We can have better financial inclusion through blockchain-powered economic identity. Digital identity on a distributed ledger available to multiple entities. We don't have to reissue an identity document, or we can reissue identity documents with, say, validity periods based on the previous data from the blockchain itself. So if the physical documents are getting stolen, because the data is also on the blockchain, we can reissue it. BankQ is one sample application mentioned here. Refugee and migrants, the challenge we had even in the early stages of pandemic with migrant labors. There are multiple projects that have happened across different entities to target this. Sending money across migrant populations has also been attempted. Then the digital identity for base of pyramid or bulk of pyramid, citizens in poverty, below poverty line. This is another scenario that we can benefit greatly in. Remember, when our tax rupees are going to be spent for base of pyramid, even a simple citizen would like to know what are the benefits coming out of it, right? When we are paying taxes, we really want to know where it's making impact. So distributed ledgers and similar mechanisms can ensure further visibility into the last mile of where the money is being spent. And then inclusion, blockchain powered remittance service. Three distributed ledgers, organizations like Western Union or even credit card channels or debit card channels typically had a much higher percentage of remittance cost. Blockchain enabled systems can reduce it drastically. So example, in Nigeria, they are transferring money as microfinance institutions within the Stellar network at very low cost. So just enabling identity and ensuring the customer is known and then further transacting with that base helps enable a lot of low cost inclusive solutions. So obviously, because we are talking of base of pyramid and we want to trace where the amount is going or identity has to be sort of publicly auditable, privacy is not required in these scenarios. Hence, it works quite well. Audits are easier because everybody gets to see what is happening on the distributed ledger, or almost everybody, if not everybody, and so forth. So if we are open, as a society, if we are open for such applications, distributed ledgers are providing us the mechanism to get there. Any other thoughts? Any way you see this approach helping or obstructing? Trade finance was one more. In sense of time, I am skipping it for now, because I hope that we will spend around 10 minutes at least to discuss how distributed ledgers and audits come together. I will leave the slide on for a minute so that it gets recorded. The steps out here are captured here as well. Then related use cases and supply chain. Supplier to producer, distributor, third-party logistics, retailer to store to customer. And remember, our supplier or producer can even be a farmer. So it could have even a farming annotation to it. This was not supposed to end here. Just a moment. Okay, the other aspect we are seeing is paying for things that we are using. Today, we are used to monthly payments. But say when we are renting a scooter for a day or a car on a trip, we may also be willing to pay insurance only for the miles driven or hours driven and so forth. So that is where we start getting into micro payments, machine making payments. FASTag is already helping us do it. But some of this, because software is doing payments on our behalf, will be also run on distributed ledgers so that we do not have disputes, settlements are faster and so forth. Few other examples with respect to governance and similar aspects. Organic farm produce, for example, renewable energy, or how much of the supply chain has been green. All those things can also be enabled better when we use distributed ledger. Yeah, so this is the part where I will sort of make sure that we have more interaction coming from you all. This is a reference that I will share shortly. Probably by Monday, I will send it out so that you can read it yourself. But few of the auditing practices that I could capture from the reference and how blockchain helps, whether we want it to be part of internal audit. So most of the things internal audit, we would like to see it happening. External audit, we may limit some of it. So today, when we are doing evidence gathering, sort of creating the record books, remember audit is not just financial. If an enterprise claims that they are doing processing without chemicals or steroids or whatever, like I'm increasingly getting into agriculture, but it could be other realm. As an auditor, you may also have to look at those aspects. So evidence gathering, whole population investigation replaces the traditional sampling approach. We can see the whole ledger. We need not do random sampling, right? And rather than distributed segregated access, we can have direct access to the transaction history. Now, whether the whole thing we want to open up to external audit, again, the visibility levels can be controlled. Does it make sense? I'm trying to talk a language that I'm not very comfortable with. So if I'm making mistakes, please correct me there. Because this part is what you guys do day in and day out. This is the part where I can help you. Right? Then transaction validation and verification. Because it is hitting a distributed ledger, close to real-time transaction validation can be done. Record verification and maintenance can be done by all users. So sort of audit role becomes part of the system also in that perspective. Remember, of the 5 roles, administrator, proposer, and all those things, auditor was a role. Frequently, it will get automated also in some of these systems. Now, whether we are complying with our processes, compliance evaluation, because built-in compliance with most recent standards, regulations, and laws through smart contracts are possible. We may still have to audit the smart contracts. Are the smart contracts actually implementing what the law says? Need not be the case. So there will have to be additional audits there. The instant presentation of underlying regulation to the operators and immediate detection of violations. These are all possible. So that is where, rather than quarterly or annual audits, now we are saying it's continuous audits. They become paramount or easier to do, I would say. Then reconciling transactions, financial reporting, near real time, again, we minimize errors, almost minimal chances of fraud. There will be policies put into place for scenarios where errors are found, and errors are genuine errors in the sense it was an entry error or mismatch happening because of some misinterpretation. They may have to be corrected by adding more transactions. But because transactions are happening because as part of audit figuring it out, probably they will be marked in a different manner. So frauds will be minimized in that matter. Then planning and advising. We will be able to provide complete, accurate records for auditors to quickly spot problems, prioritize plans, and find long-term patterns. So true efficiencies start to show up here. And obviously, as auditors, we will be able to support organization and decision support, business business intelligence, and similar things, right? Many times, we will also be able to predict the consequences of some of the choices we are making. And we can facilitate smart contracts by embedding analytical models to identify trends and figure out challenges. Okay, so these are some of the things I found from the reference. Thoughts, comments? trying to zoom in to see if it can help. Yes. Thanks for person who helped me point it out. The trick was to use windows with plus symbol to zoom, and then arrows can make us go to different parts. Thanks. I also learned something here. Thank you. Yeah, so one thing as I was reading it, it appeared to me that automation is creating newer opportunities to think more strategically. That is what was coming out here. Will our current systems easily embrace distributed ledgers for audits? I'm not too sure. But will all systems avoid using distributed ledgers? No, I think sooner than later, distributed ledgers, especially regulators, will be interested in using it. Many of the large enterprises are already starting to use it, internal audits, for example. So it's a matter of time when it becomes more prevalent. With this, I will stop. So thanks, Kalyan sir. Yeah, I could come back to the regular thing as well. Thank you. I'm not very sure if the technical depth to which I went, was it suitable or did it become a bit too technical? Krishna sir, I was not sure if I could match what you were looking at.
Yeah, your presentation is so nice, sir, but that subject is dry, so we, the members, could not interact. And,
No. What we can do again, hopefully with the unlock happening, sometimes this also helps in a more, what do you say, workshop mode, participative
Yeah.
mode. On
Yes,
a
yes.
cyber medium, we get hesitance to, and please don't worry, this is more of a learning for all of us. So
Yes,
let us
yes.
contradict each other. Let us make sure
No,
that
because of the subject, because the topic and subject, which is dry, the members could not interact much.
okay.
So any queries, members? Any doubts?
Sir, I have a question.
Sir, Raugar, please.
Yeah. See, it is not directly related to the subject on hand, but I have got a broad question. The whole world is talking about in future, there will be only cyber wars, not the physical wars. In spite of that, why are we going on improving on the technology and taking the risk and increasing our risk?
Sir, I don't want to be answering it directly, but the way I see it, Britishers or Mughals could defeat us because we didn't master either the cannons or the guns. I hope indirectly I answered your question.
Okay, okay.
Right?
Abhishek ji, he is a brother of our Sambamurthy garu.
Hi, sir. Hello.
Yes, sir. So,
Yeah, it's I am perfectly with you. Why are we in this mad race of technology if we know that it is at risk? But the problem is we have not, as a society, Indian culture, we have not taken the risks in the past, and probably we paid a price for it.
okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so calculated risk we will have to take. We will still have to make sure we put the safeguards. It cannot be blind risk.
Okay.
Members, any other queries? Abhishek ji, you have thoroughly covered the subject, which is a new and a unique topic for all of us, and which is emerging, of course, and which is very much useful and required for our professional assignments and other activities. So it means we have covered thoroughly without any doubts in the minds of members present here. Yeah, Kalyanji, we will be sharing, sir, all the sessions recorded versions. We are putting it in the YouTube. We are uploading, sir. Surely. And I request Abhishek ji for sharing this PPT for sending it to our members, sir, so that we can
Sure.
circulate. Please.
Yeah, and just the disclaimer, all I
yeah.
discussed is my individual capacity, nothing to do with IDRBT, nothing to do with
Yeah,
RBI or others. It's my
okay, sir.
individual capacity, because remember, this is still a learning that we are doing.
Okay. Yeah, so that we can circulate to our members. That's okay. Anyway, you made a good effort when preparing the presentation as well as addressed our members, so that we can circulate to our members.
We'll do that. Monday I will send it, sir.
Yeah, please, sir. Okay. So thank you very much, sir, for accepting our request and addressing our members of Visakhapatnam branch. It's really so nice of you.
This was a new thing for me, so I've tried to get into your space a little bit. I hope to learn more about what you all do on a regular basis. So I think that journey has just started for me.
Okay, good. So nice of you, sir. Members, any queries? Okay, now I request our secretary, Prashant Kumar, to propose vote of thanks.
Respected Chairman, C.S. Muralikrishna Garu, Land Speaker, Senior Member, C.S. Sambamurthy Garu, another Speaker, Dr. Abhishek Thakur Ji, Senior Members, past Chairmen, and other dignitaries. Good evening to all. I am privileged to propose vote of thanks for this session on my behalf and on behalf of Visakhapatnam branch members. Sir, Sambamurthy Garu and Dr. Abhishek Thakur Ji. Sir, I am conveying my sincere thanks to you and Abhishek Ji also for accepting our invitation, being with us and to share your valuable knowledge for the benefit of the Visakhapatnam members, sir. Sir, Sambamurthy sir, your deliberations are very much useful, given more clarity, sir, regarding the digital currency and its need. And we are very much, thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. And sir, regarding Abhishek Thakurji, your deliberations with support of wonderful PowerPoint presentation and great explanations, it's given more clarity about the blockchain technology, which is emerging technology and which is very much needed to all the members to understand what it is. It is given more clarity, sir. Thank you very much. And all the webinars who are participated and make it success, sir. Thank you one and all.
Thank you, Prashant. Thank you, Abhishek Ji. Thank you very much for your time and effort for the fraternity.
Thank you, everybody. Let's keep in touch. Thank you.